you ever felt stuck, wondering why you can't seem to follow through? Maybe thinking something is wrong with you, and really just wanting to move forward, considering if real change is even possible? Hello, and welcome to Books to Better Your Life. If those are questions on your mind, this is the podcast for you. I'm Anne Brinkman with Better Your Life Coaching. I'm a personal growth book junkie who loves sharing my latest reads with you so you can be inspired to make change in your life. I share my takeaways from a self-development, wellness, or psychology book, then tell you how I put them into practice, and then give you a challenge to take on when you're ready. I also interview up-and-coming self-development and wellness authors to get their take on the best action-oriented and behavior change skills you can use to tackle life's challenges. Ready for change? Let's dig in. Hey, this is Anne Brinkman with the Books to Better Your Life podcast. Today's book is How to Do the Work by Dr. Nicole LePera. I'm excited to share this book because to me it has some really important ideas for understanding that mind-body connection and ways that our body may be impacted in ways we don't even realize. It has a new interpretation of trauma, at least to me, which may better reflect what our body or mind is interpreting as trauma, and to me really explains why we might be having a trauma response when it's not something we would previously have thought of as a trauma. I want to emphasize that this book was written by a psychotherapist, and I am not a therapist. In sharing her ideas, I am not providing medical advice or mental health advice. Always seek the advice of your own medical provider and/or mental health provider regarding any questions or concerns you have about your specific health. Before I jump in, I did find some controversy around Dr. LePera as I researched her book for this episode. From the pushback against Instagram psychologists to that her community is a cult and that her practices aren't considerate of racial trauma. So I want you to take my book recap and see how it lines up with your own experience and do your own research especially. The last thing I would want to do is accidentally recommend a community that is really a cult. I don't think it is though, but do your research. Now, this book by Dr. LePera feels like it may become a bit of an encyclopedia for self-regulation. It even has a glossary in the back with literally allostasis, go look it up, to wise inner parent and everything in between. This is her first book. This one was printed in 2021, and she currently has 3. The full title is How to Do the Work, Recognize Your Patterns, Heal from the Past, and Create Yourself. One thing I really appreciate about this book is that Dr. LePera comes at the discussion from many directions. She is a psychotherapist, so comes with both that theoretical knowledge as well as observations from her patients and the challenges that they had overcoming issues. And possibly more importantly, she also brings her own personal experience into the mix. She very candidly shares how she has showed up when her trauma has gotten the best of her. She has also created a very large network called the Self-Healers Network, where she has been able to impact many people. Before we get into it, let's talk about the title. If you're not familiar with that idea of doing the work, it's really to be looking at yourself and taking steps to improve yourself, especially at an emotional level. What this looks like is different for everybody. Maybe that's therapy, maybe that's meditation, journaling, etc. And Dr. LePera does give ideas at the end of each chapter for what to try, especially around journaling. So let's jump into idea number 1, a new look at trauma. A key premise of this book is how our past can affect our lives, and essentially how to get over it. She presents the idea that we may have had traumas introduced into our childhood, even though they might not have traditionally been called traumas, but their effects are still traumatic. You may have heard of the ACE test, that stands for Adverse Childhood Experiences, and that scales those experiences and sort of predicts how those might impact your adult and social outcomes. Even though that's focused on traumas like family separation, mental or physical abuse, many of the traumas that Dr. LePera brings up in the book wouldn't even register on that scale. She gives a great example, though, of people of color having many experiences of not feeling safe while growing up, but the scale really doesn't reflect that experience either. So I think she's really bringing attention to just how many childhood experiences can have a significant impact on the quality of our lives. A key area she focuses on here is the feeling of safety. So in instances as a child where we had our sense of safety threatened, that could result in a trauma. She doesn't make the distinction, but I'm kind of inclined to call it little t trauma, the smaller instances of feeling unsafe versus what has typically been considered trauma, or capital T trauma, exposed to war, sexual or physical abuse, or natural disasters, amongst many other things. And interesting to note that many people might be resistant to the suggestion that their childhood was anything other than normal and that any trauma came out of it. And even with very loving and well-intentioned parents, that may still have resulted in what this book refers to as trauma. One example she brings up is of her dad coming home late one day as a child, and he was always very punctual and predictable in coming home. She vividly remembers her mom's distraught reaction as she waited for him, and Dr. LePera responded to that. This could even be a trauma if the response was so strong at that time. All right, idea number 2 is the stress impact on bodily functions. If you're familiar with The Body Keeps the Score, that's a book referenced here, and one that's been on my list to read for quite a while. And that's an idea that's really at the core of this book, of body regulation and dysregulation and how that is affecting our bodily functions. For instance, the author talks about having a disassociation being something she was aware of and what she thought was part of her personality or living situation. And it showed up with physical results of brain fog, memory issues, constipation, and eventually fainting. Now, physical dysfunction can stem from stress. Now, stress is not just in your head. The body must shift resources from its usual place of maintaining homeostasis, which is that physical, emotional, and mental balance, to protecting itself. Of course, stress is part of life. Dr. LePera references that as normative stress, birth, death, marriage, breakups, job loss. Those are all part of the human experience. And trying to avoid stress could even stress you out. Stress is normal. Now, what ideally happens is you have some strategies to de-stress, or you naturally return to that balance over some amount of time. Allostasis is leaving and returning to that balance. However, when you have chronic stress, that doesn't happen. The body stays in that stress response and doesn't return to that balance. The immune system may be on the alert for issues and start sending out chemicals, resulting in inflammation throughout the body. She calls these chemicals a fire starter for many symptoms, including the increased risk of developing an autoimmune disease, chronic pain, heart disease, and even cancer. As you might imagine, if your body is ready for war, it's not ready to fight the illnesses that we may actually want it to fight, like a cold or flu. It's no coincidence that gastrointestinal problems often come up for people with anxiety. When that body is focused on the stress response, it is limiting the resources that go to normal body functions, like digestion. That might result in constipation or irritable bowel syndrome, IBS, or diarrhea. I didn't really expect to be referencing constipation or diarrhea in one of my first podcasts. Also, when you're stressed out, what kind of food are you choosing? Probably not ones that are considering your gut biome. And then imagine people that might be in a near constant trauma state, like some oppressed populations, and the effect that that stress can have. Now, it's not all doom and gloom. She does have lots of ideas to get back to a healthier balance. But first, idea number 3, polyvagal theory. Dr. LePera was experiencing fainting episodes and was surprised as she didn't think she was experiencing anything stressful enough to cause that type of response. All of that is background to polyvagal theory. Dr. Stephen Porges is the one behind this theory. I looked him up to find a book to recommend, and his list of research articles is about 5 feet long. The book I'm looking to start with is The Pocket Guide to the Polyvagal Theory, The Transformative Power of Feeling Safe. Look forward to that on a future episode. Could you use some support in your daily interactions, either for relaxation or a confidence boost? I create a monthly recording that gets you in the frame of mind you're looking for. Maybe that's relaxation and confidence before meeting new people or before an interview. Or maybe it's helping you shift away from some negative talk. Join my recordings list at www.betteryour.life/audio. That's .life, not .com. Back to polyvagal theory. This is referencing the vagus nerve, which basically connects every major organ to the brain. We're talking about heart, gut, lungs, genitals, etc., all connected to the brainstem through this all-important vagus nerve. When we're in homeostasis, again, that balance of our systems, this nerve keeps us calm and open. When it's activated, the response can be immediate, and it helps our body become defensive, and fight or flight responses can be almost instant. Think back to an instance where you may have feared for your life or something critical was happening. You can probably remember your heartbeat increasing, sweat starting, blood pumping. All of that is the body's preparation for flight or fight, sending the resources where they're most useful. And if you're facing down a lion or someone in a dark alley, you probably don't need your body to be calmly digesting your lunch. Unfortunately for us, it may put that on the back burner. The autonomic nervous system is the part of our body controlling involuntary bodily functions. It's using clues to determine if the environment we're in is safe or unsafe. There are two systems it could trigger, the parasympathetic nervous system or the sympathetic nervous system. And that first one, the parasympathetic, is what the author calls the rest and digest system. This is when normal functions are taking place. Digestion and breathing, those are steady. This is a relaxed and calm mode. And that also enables the social engagement mode. Not only are we more receptive to social situations, but others see that way too. Our smiles look natural, our voices are more melodic, we can even hear better. Resources also go to the executive functioning side of the brain, problem-solving, planning, self-motivation, emotional regulation. And that's all in contrast to the sympathetic system. This is activation mode. This is fight or flight. All systems are ready for battle. Digestion is obviously put to the back burner. The vagus nerve sends triggers of a stress response, and so our hearts beat faster, body temperature increases, we might start sweating, adrenaline and cortisol are released. And the clues we pick up on are different too. Our hearing changes so that we can better hear possible predator sounds. And we're looking for threats in others' faces and not friendliness. Besides fight or flight, there's also the freeze response. And that's actually a response we share with reptiles. This is dissociation mode. Things slow down. Metabolism, breathing, and whatever's easiest is happening in the bowels. Letting it go or keeping it in. Breathing might stop or we might even pass out. You might feel like you're physically outside of your body. This might show up in amnesia or memory issues. And getting out of this state can be really slow as well. Dr. LePera ties all of this into how readily we can connect with others. Her patients came to her saying they can't connect with others, they can't get friends with emotional depths, they can't find love. This lack of intimacy may actually be because our body's stress response is activated and then reducing that emotional and attentional regulation. In a social environment, your subconscious may perceive a threat, real or not, and your body is activated. You may be in a state of fight, where you'll argue with anyone, flight, where you'll just leave, or freeze, where you don't say a word. And this nervous system behavior is self-confirming because we're more prone to see certain things. For instance, we're not primed to see friendly faces, so those might not even register. We aren't expecting friendly behaviors, so social cues like eye contact or pauses, those might be ignored. Okay, idea number 4 is that comfort of familiar emotions. When we grow up with an autonomic response, we might become used to that. Our mind and body are used to that response. And if it was a trauma response, our brain becomes used to that and even learn to crave the feelings associated with the trauma response. And this might be where you get stuck in a loop of emotional addiction. We are drawn to enter either the activation mode or immobilization mode. And while those modes probably feel unpleasant, the familiarity and rush are what we're looking for. There may be cortisol or dopamine being released, and later we'll want that same emotional hit. Even if part of those feelings are negative, it feels familiar and safe. Without those feelings, you may feel bored and agitated. So how this can really show up is creating drama in a relationship when things are calm, or getting into a panic about a work deadline, or even getting charged up from watching news. I wonder if you're starting to see any of this in yourself. And something that might be helpful is just understanding why this happens and that the stress reactions are outside of our conscious selves. These are automatic responses that are conditioned by experiences of co-regulation in childhood or lack thereof. Whatever you're physically experiencing is a very normal human response. And my last idea to share with you, idea number 5, on some ways to heal. There's 5 different ways that Nicole lists that help to heal the body. They help that mind-body connection and also improve the vagal tone. Let's look at some ideas she shares. Healing the gut, healing sleep, healing breath, healing movement, healing with play. I don't want to minimize these ideas by just putting a phrase out there. If you'd like to explore more of what each of these entails and why they're important, the book goes in depth, or you can start to explore them just based on those descriptions I shared there. And also, every chapter does have that journal prompt or physical practice to do, and take a look for those examples. There's a really powerful story from the book about a woman experiencing a multiple sclerosis relapse. She was in such a bad state that she was mostly confined to a wheelchair and was needing to make adjustments in her life to either retrofit her apartment or move in with family to be able to support her care. What she shared was that she took on a daily challenge to have a glass of water. Day after day of showing up for herself and having a single habit to take care of herself just expanded from there. She doesn't go into details, but she was able to recover sufficiently to be walking again and not need that in-home support. I feel like this really ties back to episode 1, where I shared James Clear's work, Atomic Habits, a core idea there of the importance of small habits and routines to create lifestyle changes. If I look at this book from a coaching perspective, often we wouldn't really be digging into events that had happened in the past that might result in trauma. To me, though, it's so important to be recognizing how our behavior and responses today are normal. There's nothing wrong with us. And this book highlights how our body can be interpreting events as trauma and also the huge impact that stress can have on the body. And when the stress response is so elevated, what we've taken for granted as normal body function is no longer working for us and then becomes an additional stressor. All this getting back to stress reduction techniques, which can often come up in coaching, depending on the coaching focus. My challenge for you this week is to choose a time during the day to practice some stress reduction technique. And if in doubt, it can just be 3 really good, slow breaths. Doesn't have to be fancy. And the idea of this is to get you used to feeling where you're at and then feeling that release that can come with that deep breathing. And then eventually you can carry that on to actually noticing in the moment and possibly being able to use that technique at that time. And one thing I like to do is I'll often start my client sessions with some deep breathing. And I really like that start, not just for setting the space of the session, but also because I'll be taking deep breaths too. And that just reminds me how easy it is to get worked up or agitated during the day and having that higher baseline stress level. And it's just such a contrast and reminder to do that breathing. Thanks for joining me for How to Do the Work by Dr. Nicole LePera today. Show notes include links to her website and community and where to buy the book locally. Have a wonderful day. Thanks for listening to Books to Better Your Life. If you could use some support on your own personal growth journey, please reach out. I'm an ICF certified life coach, and I help my clients with habits, mindset, confidence, and making what they want happen. I'm Anne Brinkman, and you can find me at www.betteryour.life. That's .life, not .com. Choose the contact option to send me a message and schedule a chat.